and the interest in drought or lack thereof. Then kind of look at the forecast components, outlooks, etc., and then we'll have time at the end. Given, I think, all in all, you know, considering this time of year, particularly in August, it's been pretty quiet. We'll jump through that as we go through the slides, though. So recapping July, when you look at the sort of the boilerplate here of the slides of where the state rankings are from a temperature and precipitation standpoint, you can see that from a temperature standpoint, most of the heat in the U.S. was along the southern tier states and up the mid-Atlantic up into the Northeast. In this region, for this webinar, the eastern corn and bean belt, obviously a little warmer than the Midwest and the Great Plains, where we see pretty normalish sort of temperatures, and even that was a tale of two tales. You had some pretty oppressive heat spells in there, days in between rain events, but then half the month was really hot and the other half was below normal, and it sort of averaged out. But as many of you on the webinar know, average doesn't mean average. Like I said, we had some spells of very hot, humid weather in that time frame as well. And on the bottom, you can see from a precipitation standpoint, again, all in all, pretty good for July, above normal for most states in the region, coupled there in sort of the middle average area where you look at, say, Nebraska, South Dakota, and then you've got one outlier there, obviously, and this will show up in the drought maps, in that being Wyoming. But you could lump western South Dakota and extreme southeast Montana into that mix as well. But then as you go east into the Midwest, Great Lakes, until you get into the Ohio Valley region, also above normal, with Ohio kind of popping out there as below average, of course, as well. Looking at, I think, a bigger story, a lot of talk, a lot of chatter this summer's been about the high minimums. These are the minimum temperature ranks, and you can see they've been above average for most of the region, well above average when you look at, say, Ohio and Kentucky, and then pretty average when you get out into Nebraska, South Dakota, and Wyoming. Okay, so year-to-date, year-to-date's on the top left. We're looking at temperature here. You can see a lot of that orangish salmon color for the entire CONUS stands out pretty glaringly. You can see a lot of these are much above average, top 5, top 10 across the board for most of these states in the region here, and some of those coming in, like Wyoming again, popping out at 120. So you're looking at top 5, again, top 5 high type of temperatures for year-to-date running January through July, and that's comparing all January through July's back to 1895. This comes from the National Centers for Environmental Information. Bottom right, we're looking at precipitation ranks. Again, nothing really pops out too much here except Ohio on the dry side, and some that are slightly above average year-to-date. Nobody really well above average or record wetness, although we've had some pretty extreme flooding events sprinkled in between some of these dry day, hot, oppressive weeks where the drought has been occurring. But most of the states here you can see, except Ohio, kind of coming in either normalish or just slightly above average when it comes to precipitation over the year-to-date precipitation. And that should have been 2016, not 2015. Zooming into this region in particular, information here from the High Plains Regional Climate Center and ACES, which all the regional climate centers, the data collection comes from those groups. Looking at departure from normal temperature over the last month, you can see the warmest or hottest departures are coming out there in the eastern corn and bean belt and up into the Great Lakes region. And then it's spotty pockets of well above normal temperatures across North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and parts of central South Dakota. In between there, it's pretty normalish for the last 30 days when it comes to temperature. Heating degree days, another one that's kind of been talked about here of late over the last month, 6 weeks, because it, some concern about heating degree days, but on the growing season as a whole, pretty average-ish for the most part. but we are running slightly below. You can see they're just slightly below. Top left is more into the Great Plains, and bottom right's more into the Midwest and Great Lakes, except for those northern tier states in the Great Lakes region running above, as you see here on the map. 30-day precipitation now, switching over to precipitation left. Departure from normal, again, plus or minus 3 inches is pretty much the norm. Nothing too crazy there until you get into southern Illinois and down into southeast Missouri, where we've had a lot of flooding and much greater departures above normal there. And on the bottom right, we have the percent of normal precipitation, just echoing that with a lot of the deep purples, more or less in the central Mississippi region there, and over up into parts of the eastern Dakotas and Minnesota and parts of western Wisconsin, which have been pretty wet. But we have pockets of dryness up on the rim in the upper peninsula of Michigan and eastern Wisconsin, and as well as what we've talked about prior with sort of the Black Hills region of South Dakota, extreme southeast Montana, and up into northeast Wyoming. So more recent developments sort of been in sort of the rain basin parts of south central Nebraska, northwestern Kansas, where we've had a little bit of a dry down here the last month or so. So that's an area we've been keeping an eye on, particularly with regards to, with some of this region here, we'll be interested in getting some soil moisture buildup before planting of winter wheat here in the next month or so. So that's a region to keep an eye on up and down the winter wheat belt moving forward, and maybe that will be a bigger topic on the next webinar next month and Brad Rippey's briefing from the USDA perspective. This is the slide kind of getting into growing season precipitation. So beyond just the last 30 days, let's take the top left and look at departures. That area that I was speaking about in the Black Hills region, western South Dakota over into Wyoming and parts of Montana, you can see departures there 3 to 6 inches or more. And then you have to scoot on into south central Iowa and north central Missouri, where we had that early growing season dryness develop. And of course over into the Ohio, northern Ohio, northeast Indiana, and parts of northern Michigan and eastern Wisconsin. Percent of normal map in the bottom right just kind of plays that out, where you can see where that falls over the growing season between April 1st and yesterday. Stream flow across the region, not too bad, except again parts of the Ohio Valley. Pretty wet in the midsection of this region in the upper Mississippi Basin and the central Mississippi Basin throughout most of the Great Plains until you get over into parts of Wyoming and parts of the Black Hills. But all in all, for August, this is a 28-day average, so we're looking at a 4-week average to sort of take out the noise that you get on individual storms that come through and spike these values up. So all in all, when you're looking at a monthly stream flow average, we're above normal to much above normal over the midsection of the region, and record high in that area that I mentioned earlier down in southern Illinois and southeastern Missouri into the Boot Heel region. Zooming in on some of these regions a little closer, a little bit more detail, we can see here in the Missouri Basin most of the dryness up there that's feeding into the Missouri, out of Wyoming and parts of South Dakota and North Dakota. Other than that, pretty normal to above normal down as you get into the lower Missouri Basin. And when we look here, it's sort of into the upper central Mississippi. Pretty good shape here, above average to actually too much excess with the black dots there, the record high, according to USGS. Again, these are 20-day averages, not daily averages or 7-day averages, but rather 28 days. So that's significant when you see these the darker blues and the blacks for that time period. Moving eastward over into the Ohio Valley, you can see here again, all in all, not too bad. For hydrologically, this hasn't really been a hydrological drought per se. It's been more of concern on the agricultural upper soil moisture column, and I'll show a product on that here in just a minute. But I guess this just illustrates that we haven't seen a significant decline, hydrologically speaking, And maybe that will be in the discussion later. You know, what has that meant for the Great Lakes region and others? Looking at soil moisture, again, this is a little bit of a lag, so there's a little bit of a lag out of the models that come out of NCEP here, which they're looking at soil moisture in the top meter here. So obviously the region that pops out is going to be Michigan, northern Indiana, and Ohio, where we've seen that dryness. Again, that's through August 13th. The rest of the region, all in all, not too bad until you get out into parts of south central Nebraska, the western Dakotas, and eastern Wyoming. But this is an area for looking, you know, when I showed you the picture of the cornfield right up front, that came out of northern Ohio, if I remember correctly from Jim. And up into the Great Lakes region in Michigan, we've had a lot of media there, and there's been a lot of attention on the dryness and drought this year in the Northeast. So that whole region, the Northeast up into New England's been pretty dry this summer. Kind of looking at vegetation stress, this is the evaporative stress index, actually. You know, we can see here again that stress that's been occurring in the Ohio northeastern region up into Michigan, and then back over into the Black Hills region and other parts there, stretching in the Dakotas and Wyoming. This is where we've seen most of the vegetation stress. It hasn't. This is just the 4-week composite. They do produce a longer composite, but this is the 4-week composite. And all in all, you know, as far as concerns about fire and grass fires this time of year, which are typically a concern in August, all in all across the region, not too bad until you get out into Wyoming and parts of the Black Hills and South Dakota and parts of southeast Montana. Other than that, not too bad. Really, really low risk in the Midwest Great Lakes region for the most part, considering the time of year. All in all, pretty good shape. Switching over to the drought monitor now. This is the recent map that just came out this morning. So we can see all in all across the U.S. just shy of 20% in some form of drought. It's down a little bit from last week, not a lot, just about 1% or 2% or so, depending on where you are. We're still showing that residual drought there in Ohio. We'll come into the regional map next. And I've kind of put a circle around the current numbers. You can see we've dropped a little bit last week for the entire region. We had just over 12% in some sort of drought. This week we've dropped below 10%. So again, we've had some pretty good rain, some pretty good systems come through. We've got some more rain and some more cooler temperatures on the way here soon through the next few days and lingering through next week. And then by then we're at the end of August. So things have been pretty good all in all, and that's reflected in the continuing improvement of drought conditions according to the drought monitor. The area that still pops out is going to be that Black Hills region and northern Ohio, northeastern Indiana, and parts of northern Michigan. This is if you haven't used these products before, I think these change maps do a nice job of putting it into pictures. Here I'm looking at just a 1-month change map between August 16th map of today versus the map of July 19. And anywhere you see yellows and oranges and browns, things have gotten worse, and anywhere you see blues and greens, they've gotten better. The darker the color, the better the improvement, or the worse the degradation. So all in all, pretty stable drought-wise in the region. No major 3, 4, 5 class changes on either side of the spectrum. It's mostly been 1 to 2 class improvement or 1 to 2 class getting worse, and most of that again was part of in the Ohio region and parts of south central Nebraska and north central South Dakota. But other than that, the rains have actually led to greens on the map. So all in all, pretty mixed bag with some gray sprinkled in there for no change. So again, July wasn't a huge month for getting traction in either direction, pretty much holding serve for most. Looking at the 1 month for this region in particular, again, not to repeat myself too much here, but just zooming in a little tighter, lots of blues and greens as you get east of the Mississippi in general, except for those pockets in Ohio and extreme northeastern Indiana. So all in all, improvement over what's typically a dry, hot month. So we've made up some ground, so to speak. When we go back 3 months, if we go back now through comparing now to May 24th, there we see we're through the growing season, not too unexpectedly, so this is the time of year where you can see droughts develop as compared to, say, the winter months. We've seen that rapid drought development that we saw out in the Black Hills region and across Ohio and parts of the Great Lakes, particularly in northern Michigan. And the more recent one that's been developing here sort of in the Rain Basin or south central part of Nebraska is that's expanded a little bit over the last week or two. But all in all, over the last 3 months, a lot of white on that map, so we haven't seen a lot of change one way or the other. So let's change the focus over onto the outlooks now. As I mentioned, cooler, wetter weather seems to be on the way, or likely on the way, as we, especially if you're east of the Missouri River Basin. But even there, as you go west of that a ways, we're seeing some chances for some pretty good rainfall. As we get to the end of August, you start seeing an inch or more a week. That's going to be above normal. Where we see the purples, and we're seeing a lot of that. Could be some continued concerns for some flooding in some of those areas over the next 7 days, and that's up through August 25th, so that gets us towards the end of the month. So all in all, August has been pretty favorable from a rainfall perspective. 8 to 14 day outlook. On the left, you're looking at temperature, what the temperature signature is looking like, and for most of this region, the odds are tilted towards below normal temperatures, all the way from Wyoming to Ohio. Little bit clipping the Upper Peninsula and parts of the Great Lake, the slight odds of being above normal in that region, but all in all, looking, like I said, a cool down that'll take us through the end of the month. This outlook takes us through August 31st. The map on the right is on the precipitation, and again, except for those border states between Canada and the U.S., which have a slight chance of being below normal, pretty good bullseye of a greater likelihood of above normal precipitation right over the country's midsection, including Wyoming, and then all the way over to Indiana. And so this region here in the green is looking favorable for rainfall through the end of the month, and that will take us into September. And if this pattern continues, then I guess we'll see in a month's time if people are actually concerned the other way about, how's this affecting getting in the fields for harvesting and things of that nature. But right now, we'll take it for a lot of areas, and in particular, it'd be good to see this rainfall in that winter wheat belt that I spoke about earlier, to get some moisture in the ground to help with germination once they seed it, to see that trend continue, at least from the winter wheat perspective. Turning our attention to more of the ENSO, the El Nino La Nina story, as we've transitioned through the summer. We're technically neutral right now, bordering on very weak La Nina conditions. You can see most of the models here, and all those names on the right, all those acronyms are just a series of models that various countries and other groups produce. And we're just looking at most of these telling a story below the zero line, centered mostly around, again, that negative 0.5 line, which you can see here. Put the little table on the bottom right that would tell you when you see a weak or strong. And here on the weak side, these should be negatives. As we get to negative 0.5 and or lower, that would be on the cold event side, what we call La Nina. And so this information is the latest one as of mid-July. The mid-August one has not been issued yet. This is the early August. A different way of looking at that same information is, notice here the blue bars, they're hedging their bets between 50 and 60% likelihood, starting somewhere in that early fall into early winter time frame, of a little slightly better chance of being into this La Nina cold event. But neutral's right up there too, in that 40% or 40 probability percent through that same time frame. So it's not a super strong signal. That's kind of come down, and if it does get into the cold event, La Nina type of event, it's looking like it might be a pretty weak one now. So that's something we'll just keep watching as this develops over the next couple months or so, and then into next year. So we're coming off of that. Here's what the latest is for that. What does that mean for the seasonal outlooks, and how much what's that lag of what's occurring in the oceans going to affect what's happening in the atmosphere and what that does to our climate over the winter? For September, both on the top left and the top right, the top left is temperature. Just for September, equal chances. So it's not a strong signal there for above, below, or normal when it comes to temperatures. Top right, precipitation over the September time period, equal chances for the entire region here that we're talking about on this webinar. When you go to the bottom left, here we're into the 3-month probability of being above normal temperature-wise, again, through November, so September through November. For temperatures are looking to be above normal. You see a little bit less odds of that, sort of from Montana over into North Dakota, parts of northwestern Minnesota. You know, is that the La Nina signal trying to force its way in there a little bit? But all in all, you can see the entire CONUS and Alaska included are looking to be above normal temperature-wise into the early winter time period. For precipitation on the bottom right, same period, September through November, equal chances for the majority of the region, save for a little bit there in the western Dakotas and Montana and extreme northern, northeastern Wyoming, which have slightly above odds for being a little bit wetter than normal, perhaps, as this plays out over the next 3 months. What's that mean for the seasonal drought outlook? Again, this is taking the current drought monitor and projecting, will it get at least one class better or one class worse over the next 3 months through the end of November? For the entire region, it's mostly improvement. Drought removal likely are the green polygons, including those in Ohio. This is from the Center. They issue both a monthly and a seasonal drought outlook. I've just shown the seasonal today. And then as you get over into the Black Hills, we're seeing on the fringes of this drought removal being likely, or remaining but improving, not maybe totally getting rid of drought through the November time period, but maybe improving the situation there slightly, so at least by one category that is. So we don't see any development or any sort of yellow in this region. We're only seeing that a little bit in the southeast, and again, that might be a little bit of their early La Nina signature coming into play. So in summary, we've had a mixed bag across the region, as you've seen from on the precipitation front. Obviously a little drier in the west in the Black Hills region, drier in the Great Lakes, northern Ohio and Indiana regions, and wet in between for the most part, give or take. Most of the region has seen pretty normal to slightly above normal temperatures. Again, periods of dryness, periods of high humidity, no rain days, and then really good or heavy rains actually in between those dry events. So the hottest departures have been in the eastern corn and bean belt and parts of the eastern Great Lakes region. So the recent story this summer that's had the most chatter has been these high minimum nighttime temperatures and the stress that puts on people and plants and animals, high dew points and corn sweating. And I can vouch too for some grass sweating there. You could just feel it walking across it. We've had some pretty oppressive high dew points for Nebraska here, just where we're at in Lincoln. It's felt a lot like St. Louis, it seems like to me, in parts of July and August to date. So that's been part of the story. We have less than 10% of this region in any sort of drought between D1 and D3. There is no D4. The Black Hills region is the area that pops out there, as well as northern Ohio, northeastern Indiana. Those two areas are the exception, according to the drought monitor. So we do have a La Nina watch in effect. That comes from the International Research Institute and Climate Prediction Center. We've technically been ENSO neutral since May, and right on the fringe of a weak La Nina event, with odds being slightly tilted towards pushing into a weak cold event in the fall, early winter time frame. So most of the region between now and then looks to remain warm. If you remember the seasonal outlook that I showed the next 3 months, the entire CONUS, the entire lower 48 states look to remain warm. Odds are hedging that way, and precipitation, really no strong signal there, pretty much equal chances. A little bit of the upper Missouri Basin being the exception that I showed, up there in Montana and parts of the western Dakotas. So because of that, no new drought development is anticipated, and in fact, mostly improvement or status quo can be expected over the next 3 months. Okay, for again, showing you where you can go find these webinars as they are recorded, and other good references. A lot of the data that I'm using are coming from these sources here and others. This is where you can go find that. Feel free to check out some of the other products. It's tough to pack them all in a 30 to 40-minute presentation. But anyway, I'll stop there, Doug, and see if you get any people to ask questions or raise their hands. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to steal the the presentation back from you just for a minute because I wanted to show a couple of things that you touched on and give you an update on a couple of things too that may not have been available to you. But the first thing you may see on your screen, can you see my screen right now, the ENSO model outlooks? See that, Mark?
I do not see it. Oh, no, yeah, I do see it. No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Let me try that again. No? My screen, what does it show on the screen?
Yeah, you're moving your mouse around now. I see it. ENSO model outlooks.
Okay. So what Mark showed was the graph on the left from July, and this is the updated one from August that came in very recently in the last day or two. You really don't see, and really the thing to focus on, I suppose, since we're talking so broad scale here, is that yellow line sort of is the average, if you will, of all these model outputs. And there's really not a huge change there in terms of what, and this really is trying to show us how strong or how weak the La Nina or El Nino will be. In this case, it's really pointing towards a very, very innocuous sort of middling to weak La Nina event, which is not helpful to us climate folks who try to look out to the future and make sense of it all. Last year we had that relatively strong El Nino shaping up, and it did materialize, and we got some impacts, although it wasn't a stereotypical El Nino. This is a very weak one, and so, or at least right now it is, and we'll have to see what the ramifications of that are going to be in the future, and get more information as we go. There will be a winter outlook officially from the Climate Prediction Center, which is in NOAA, put out in October, and that will have a lot more information, excuse me, based on that. The other slide I wanted to show is, I think Mark showed heating degree days, and I think he meant to show growing degree days. I'm not positive, Mark, but I had a question or two about what are heating degree days, and I thought, well, it might be more applicable. And all I have here is from the Midwest. I'd have to go search a little bit more to get the whole region. But these are growing degree days, and this is sort of a modified one, modified growing degree days, which mean the number of, it's supposed to relate what temperatures for, this is based on corn, so temperatures between 50 and about 86 degrees. How perfect has the atmosphere been, has the climate been? And the one on the left starts in April 1st, and the one on the left starts in May 1st. So depending upon when you planted stuff, in this case corn, the more growing degree days, generally, the better for most crops. And if you just quick glance at this, where you see light blue to green, which is almost everything, the growing degree days have been slightly greater than average. We have a few more this year than average, and where it's sort of been hotter, and as in Ohio, you see it's been a lot more, which is not surprising, and that happens quite often where there's drier areas. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of how many growing degrees you really want. Growing conditions across generally speaking, growing conditions across the Midwest have been very good this year. I won't get into a lot of details because I'm not an agriculture specialist, but I think there probably are some on the phone. So what I'll do now, and I see there's a couple questions out there in the world. A actually I have a couple questions that I can relate to you, Mark, and you can handle them, or you can throw them back at me, or we might. I see a couple of them are actually for experts who are on the call that I might pick on. Like I'll cue you up, Aaron Wilson from OSU, because there's a question about concerns about corn yield loss in Indiana and Ohio, and Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. And since you're sort of the Ohio guy, hopefully you're listening. I'm going to take you off mute and put you on the spot. Put you on the spot, Aaron. And if you don't know, that's fine. But I just figured you're from Ohio, and you might have a better idea on corn either yield or gross losses in those states.
Yeah, I can't really speak of the specifics yet. We've got some information that we're gathering from Department of Ag and other Ohio, the OSU extension educators and stuff. But what I can speak about a little bit about the nature of what's happening. So there's an Ohio AgNet group that's been doing these I-75, I-71 through the state, these tours county by county, looking at the corn and looking at the soybean product. And generally, just like the drought monitor and that information shows, crops have been pretty good in the southern part of the state. It's once you get into the northern Great Miami Basin, so north of Dayton and north of Columbus, in the northern Scioto Basin, where we've had some issues, but that's also been county by county. And so there's been some effect on the yield, but in terms of specific amounts yet, I probably don't have that information adequate enough to share.
Yeah. Yeah, that might be I think it's an unknown also at this point in the season. And
right.
Obviously there are some bad pictures coming out of Ohio.
That picture Mark showed was from just north of Dayton in Miami County. It was from one of the educators, extension educators from there. So that was in Miami County. So
okay.
Yeah, so some of the fields have looked like that. Yet you could go, here in central Ohio, the fields look pretty good, green down to the base. Yeah, so it's just been, once you get basically north of I-70 in the central part of the state, it's been a county by county kind of thing. A lot of the region got hit by the very dry conditions right when the corn needed it, and so we were probably a little bit late addressing that, but unfortunately, but anyway, so we should have some more information soon about, once harvest begins on the yields and stuff.
And it's purely speculative from my part, not being an expert here, but I will say that it hasn't moved. What's happening, or what has happened in parts of Ohio, really haven't moved the market, is probably a safe thing just to talk about, or to say. So again, the crop is so good in so many other parts of the country that it's sort of a blip, if you will. Okay, thank you very much, Aaron. I didn't mean to really put you on the spot, but I saw you there.
No, that's fine. No problem.
Okay. Hey, I'm gonna mute you again. Mark, I don't know if you remember what we heard about South Dakota, but are there any crop concerns? I have another question about crop concerns in South Dakota. I know that we got some pictures in and heard a little bit about hail recently, and that seems to be maybe a bigger player in terms of corn and soybeans in parts of that state. I don't remember what parts of the state that's from, but further west there was some forage and basically hay issues in terms of far west that people were worried about having enough or being able to get their last cutting and all that other stuff. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say, impact-wise, those are the two big ones. There have been some of these recent severe outbreaks with hail, and then we've had a lot of impacts and calls from ranchers and others in that entire region that I talked about, the tri-point between southeast Montana, northeast Wyoming, and western South Dakota, about decimation of forage and that's really been an issue for a while there, not just in the summer period even, for folks there. So that's been a big one. I think it's the biggest one actually when you look at it programmatically. So yeah, and I will give you a shout out, kudos. That's what I get for putting this together late last night. and having meetings all day this morning, I did mean to put in growing degree days. I mean, I thought people might be interested in how much energy it takes to heat a building, but you're probably more interested in the agricultural side of that. So that's why Doug gets paid the big bucks, is to moderate and pinch hit for me like that. So thanks.
Wow, that's great. Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually, there's a couple other things. Kara, I saw your suggestion there, and I did. It was my fault, not Mark's, for not putting it in presentation slideshow mode on those images that I put up there. Chad McNutt, I'm going to let you, actually, I'm going to take you off mute here and let you talk about that drought summary that was posted somewhere today. Maybe you can tell us where that was. Go ahead, Chad.
Can you hear me okay, Doug?
Yes.
Yeah, Chad.
Okay, long-time listener, first-time caller. But yeah, this is Chad McNutt, and I work for NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System, and we're a drought program that's part of NOAA. And in collaboration with the Wyoming State Climate Office and the High Plains Regional Climate Office and Doug and Mark at the National Drought Mitigation Center, we produced a kind of a statewide look at drought in Montana, or excuse me, Wyoming. And it's posted on the Wyoming State Climate Office. And I can post a link in the question, but maybe in the question box there, Doug, but maybe it might be easier for you to show everybody. But we do have it out, and it's going to come out, probably approximately monthly. The next one it came out today, and the next one will be, I think, on September 8th. So we're going to do it as long as we need to in the state.
Chad, what is the URL? I'm sorry. Do you have that or not?
It's a little long to say.
Yeah. Okay.
But I can put it in the comment box if you want.
You could put it in the chat box or comment box, and let's see people click on it if you want. So okay. Yeah, feel free and send it to the entire audience if you're able.
All right.
Thank you, Chad. And then I do want to get back to Verlin had a question, and I guess I'll just ask it, Verlin, if there's something else you want to say, just type something in. But Verlin would like to hear a little bit more about the Keach-Byram Drought Index or Fire Index, whatever it's called, from you, Mark, and what parameters it uses and such. Do you know that? You usually do.
A little bit. Yeah, obviously a little. It's not my area of expertise either. It's just it's another. What you're more interested in there a lot of times with fire are going to be things like relative humidity, fuel load, wind, things of that nature. And so it's looking at particularly relative humidity, dryness in the soils, and then fuel, what's available for short-term and long-term fuel. And so the Keach-Byram has been around a long time. The Forest Service uses that as one of their primary indicators. And then you have a lot of the state forestry groups in the region and across the U.S. that will use the Keach-Byram because it's a little bit more robust than just a traditional climate hydro drought indicator per se.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, this is really a question for you, Mark. The last question I have from, actually several of these questions have been from Benjamin Diamond. And Benjamin, if you do want to ask another question, feel free. The question is, why is, this is a little bit out of our region, so that's why it's important that you're the guy, Mark, to answer this question, I hope. Why is Texas's drought situation D0, D1, despite the USDA's poor crop conditions? Do you have any knowledge about that?
Ooh, specifically on the crop, I haven't authored the drought monitor in a few months. What I would say, though, is obviously, as some of the folks on this webinar are aware of, the drought monitor has a lot of folks involved at the state level that provide data, they provide impacts, they help guide the authors in making that map. And Texas is they have a ton of people involved in helping depict that situation down there. So we're, in addition to just the normal ag statistic reports, both from the federal and state agencies involved and the Texas Water Development Board, et cetera, we try to take all that into account. But in the case of Texas, I can speak with authority that we get a lot of input from the field that helps drive that. So typically, droughts are one of those tricky things sometimes where they're coming off a 5-year drought. There's that lingering sort of hydrological impact that's sort of the undertow or undercurrent, if you will. And then you can have sort of a real short little quick burst of flashy drought type of situations, particularly in the summer down there. And that can lead to a little flare-up in conditions, agriculturally speaking. But all in all, they've been on the mend now for a while. Record wetness earlier, but then they can have this time where they just dried out a little bit. So that's the depth of what I know about it. There might be others on that can speak, that could raise their hand better than I could, Doug.
Well, the one thing I'll say, Mark, that just because they have bad crop conditions doesn't necessarily mean there's a drought there. There could have been a late planting due to or too much water in the field.
Too much water,
in some place in eastern Texas and other parts, and it also it could have gotten dry but not officially droughty, even during really critical times of, let's say, kernel filling or whatever they call it, ear filling and all that kind of stuff that time. So there are a lot of reasons. And I see Mary Knapp is speaking of. Another issue is that Texas was, she's saying, yeah, she said it was very wet and then it switched to dry sort of at a bad time. Maybe rooting systems didn't get established well. So it didn't take much dryness to impact yield, if you will. So all those things can help.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was kind of a short way of saying what I said in many more words, but that was a concern we actually really had in a good portion of the Midwest in this region going into the growing season, was the early start and rain, and if it did turn dry and hot, that shallow root development could have been a big issue, but I think we dodged the bullet there. So that could be a little bit what we're seeing in Texas.
Okay. Thank you, Mary, by the way, and everybody else who's provided information. I think we're just about done here, unless there are any other questions. I still can unmute you if you want to ask something live. Just hold up your hand and or hit the question mark. Otherwise, I guess we can say it's been a very good talk. Thank you very much, Mark. And we'll be back again, like I said earlier, on September 15th. It'll be a two-headed monster, if you will, between Dennis Toddy and Brad Rippey, both from USDA, who are going to be helping us out on this. So at that note, I say thank you very much, and if there's anything you need, please feel free to contact myself or Mark Sabota.